Let's talk about Eleanor. She's 75, a retired Greek teacher who spent her entire life shaping young minds. She imagined a peaceful retirement, maybe tending to her garden, enjoying time with her grandkids. But instead, she's watching her pension shrink, a promise from the government now feeling more like a betrayal. Eleanor's story isn't just about Greece. It's a warning sign for all of us, a glimpse into a massive global pension crisis that's quietly brewing. So how did we get here? For decades, most developed countries have relied on something called a pay-as-you-go pension system. The idea is simple. Today, his working generation pays taxes that directly fund the pensions of today's retirees. When this system was created, families were larger and there were plenty of young workers to support a smaller number of retirees. It worked beautifully for a while. It was like a well-oiled machine. But times have changed. The math just doesn't add up anymore. The key problem is the worker-to-retiree ratio. Let's look back to the 1960s. In many developed nations, you might have had 7, 8, or even 10 workers for every single retiree. That's a solid foundation. The tax contributions from 10 people can easily support one person's pension. It was a stable, secure system. Now, fast forward to today, that ratio has plummeted. We're living longer, which is fantastic news, but we're also having fewer children. This demographic shift has created a perfect storm. In many countries, the ratio is now closer to 3 workers for every retiree. In some places, like Japan and Italy, it's even lower, approaching 2 to 1. Think about that. The financial burden that was once shared by 10 people is now falling on the shoulders of just 2 or 3. It's like trying to support a roof with just a couple of pillars instead of a whole row. Eventually, something has to give. This isn't just a problem for Europe or Japan. It's a global issue. From the United States to China, governments are staring down the same ticking time bomb. They're facing a tough choice. Either they raise taxes significantly, which is politically unpopular and can stifle economic growth, or they cut pension benefits, which is what's happening to Eleanor in Greece. This means people will either have to work much longer, well past the traditional retirement age, or accept a much lower standard of living in their golden years. The promise of a secure retirement, once a cornerstone of the social contract, is becoming increasingly fragile. Eleanor's story isn't just a sad tale from a distant country. It's a wake-up call. We are all on this ship together, and the waters are getting choppy. The systems that supported our grandparents are buckling under the pressure of our modern world. It forces us to ask some really hard questions. What does retirement mean in the 21st century, and what can we, as individuals and as a society, do to ensure that our later years are a time of security and dignity, not anxiety and struggle? The conversation needs to start now, before it's too late for millions more Eleanors around the world. Thanks for watching. If this topic matters to you, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the issues that shape our world. Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor, created the first national pension system, not out of generosity, but out of political survival. Socialist movements were gaining dangerous momentum among industrial workers. Bismarck, an aristocratic conservative, needed to defuse the threat without surrendering power. His solution was elegant in its cynicism. He created a government pension funded by contributions from workers and employers. The retirement age was set at 70. Here's the detail that matters. In 1889, average life expectancy in Germany was approximately 40 years. The vast majority of workers would never reach 70. The system was designed to look like a generous social contract while costing almost nothing, a political pacifier with an actuarial trapdoor built into the foundation. Then people started living longer. Medicine improved, nutrition improved, working conditions improved. Life expectancy doubled across the developed world. What Bismarck designed as a minimal expense became an expanding obligation that no one had budgeted for, because no one had expected it. The original design assumed most people would die before they became costly. They didn't. By 1935, when the United States created Social Security, life expectancy at birth was approximately 61 years. The retirement age was set at 65. The design logic was identical to Bismarck's. Most workers would contribute for decades, but collect for only a few years, if at all. Today, American life expectancy is approximately 77 years. A worker retiring at 65 can reasonably expect 20 years of benefits. What was designed as a brief safety net has become a decades-long commitment. The original actuarial assumptions were not dishonest. They were simply built for a world that no longer exists. And the system was never fundamentally rebuilt. It was patched, always in the same direction. More benefits, broader eligibility, higher promises, and a demographic foundation that was quietly rotting beneath every extension. The trap was set in 1889. It has been closing ever since. Now examine the mathematics that every actuary, every budget office, and every finance ministry in the developed world already knows, and almost no one will state clearly in public. In 1950, the United States had 16 workers for every Social Security recipient. 16. The contribution burden on each worker was minimal. The system felt sustainable because it was under those demographic conditions. By By 1960, the ratio had fallen to 5 workers per retiree. By 2020, it was 2.8. Current projections from the Social Security trustees show it falling below 2 by the early 2040s. Japan is further along the same trajectory. In 1970, there were 8.5 workers per retiree. By 2020, the ratio was 2.1. By 2050, projections show it approaching 1.3, meaning each working Japanese citizen will bear roughly the cost of an entire pension in addition to funding their own retirement. The United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Spain, South Korea. The ratios differ. The direction is identical. Every single one of these systems was designed during an era of population growth, with the assumption baked into the foundation that there would always be more young people entering the workforce than old people leaving it. That assumption is now mathematically false in every advanced economy on Earth. Here is the moment this channel always looks for. The specific point where a structural flaw became visible to anyone who looked carefully. The year is 1960. Ephraim Nestor had contributed to Social Security for 19 years. He was then deported for past membership in the Communist Party, and the government terminated his benefits. He sued, arguing that he had a contractual right to what he had paid in. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled against him. The judgment was unambiguous. American workers have no contractual right to Social Security benefits. Congress can reduce them, restructure them, or eliminate them entirely at any time. Your contributions do not create a legal claim. They create a political expectation, which is an entirely different thing. Fleming v. Nestor, 1960. United States Supreme Court. The case is public. The ruling is public. The implication that every worker in America is contributing to a system that owes them nothing in the legal sense is almost entirely unknown. Most people paying into Social Security today believe they have a right to what was promised. They believe they are paying into an account. They believe the system is solvent. The Supreme Court established this 65 years ago. It is settled law, not speculation, not interpretation. This is the hidden architecture of a pay-as-you-go system. It is not a contract. It is a policy. And policies change when the mathematics demand it. Now watch that principle in real time. In Greece, in the country where Eleanor stood in the dark at 4 a.m. By the early 2000s, Greece had one of the most generous pension systems in Europe. Public sector workers could retire after 35 years of service, sometimes in their early 50s. Benefits were high. Contribution rates were insufficient to fund them. The gap was covered by government borrowing, made cheap by Greece's membership in the Eurozone. Then came 2009. The financial crisis revealed what the numbers had been concealing. Greece's debt was far higher than reported. Its pension obligations were a primary driver. International creditors agreed to provide bailout loans, but only with conditions. Pensions were the primary target. What followed was mathematically necessary and humanly catastrophic. Between 2010 and 2015, Eleanor's pension was cut by 45%. The retirement age was raised. Eligibility rules were tightened. A generation of workers who had planned their entire lives around a specific income watched that income disappear. Not because they had done anything wrong, but because the arithmetic that was always there finally became impossible to ignore. Eleanor lost 45% of her pension. She taught mathematics for 35 years. She understood numbers better than most. And the numbers that destroyed her retirement had been visible in every actuarial report, every demographic projection, every IMF warning for 20 years before 2009. The information was public. The math was simple. The politics were impossible. Greece went first. But the pattern does not belong only to Greece. Let that ratio settle for a moment before continuing. 16 workers per retiree in 1950, under 3 today, approaching 2 by 2040. In less than a century, the load each worker carries has increased by a factor of 8. The benefit levels have not decreased by a factor of 8. The contribution rates have not increased by a factor of 8. The gap between what the system promises and what the mathematics can support has been widening for 70 years. Japan presents the same mechanism at a different speed. By 2020, nearly 29% of Japan's population was over 65. By 2050, projections show this rising above 37%. To manage the pension burden without triggering the sudden collapse that hit Greece, Japan has kept interest rates near zero for 3 decades, raised consumption taxes, gradually reduced benefit generosity, encouraged elderly citizens to work into their 70s, and accumulated public debt now exceeding 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. Japan is not solving the pension mathematics. It is converting them into debt and distributing the cost across time, which means distributing it onto people who have not yet been born. The pattern is the same in every case. The numbers differ. The mechanism is identical. The United Kingdom tells a quieter version of the same story. The state pension age has been rising steadily, from 60 for women and 65 for men towards 67 for both, with further increases already legislated. The triple lock that guarantees pension increases, whichever is highest among inflation, earnings growth, or 2.5%, has become the subject of permanent political controversy as the cost becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. The Office for Budget Responsibility has repeatedly identified the aging population as the single largest long-term fiscal risk facing the British government. In 2023, the OBR projected that age-related spending alone will push the UK's public debt above 300% of GDP by the 2070s without significant reform. This is not a distant projection. It is a trajectory already in motion, tightening every year, with no political consensus on how to alter it. Argentina demonstrates what happens when a government controls its own currency. In 2001, facing unsustainable debt partly driven by pension obligations, Argentina converted dollar-denominated pensions to pesos, then devalued the peso. Overnight, retirees lost roughly 70% of their purchasing power. No parliamentary debate, no pension cut announcement, a currency adjustment, and 30 years of contributions lost most of their real value in a weekend. Greece cut directly because it had no currency to devalue. It used the euro. Argentina cut through currency. The form differed. The function was identical. When the mathematics became unsustainable, the adjustment fell on those who had trusted the system most. In every documented case, it has. The form varies by country. The function is identical everywhere. Once a pay-as-you-go system is established, it cannot be dismantled without forcing one generation to pay twice. The workers currently in their 40s have already contributed for 20 years. Those contributions went directly to current retirees. They are gone. If the government now transitions to a funded system, those workers must simultaneously fund current retirees and save for their own retirement. Paying twice. This is politically unsurvivable. No government can tell an entire generation that their contributions purchased nothing, and they must begin again. So governments do not reform. They patch. They raise the retirement age by 2 years. They adjust the inflation formula. They means test high earners. They borrow. They print. Each patch buys time without changing the underlying mathematics. And the longer the adjustment is delayed, the larger the required adjustment becomes, and the more politically impossible it becomes. France demonstrated this in 2023. Millions took to the streets when the government attempted to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Refineries shut down. Garbage piled in the streets. The reform barely passed, raising the age by 2 years when the underlying mathematics required far more. If a 2-year adjustment produces that reaction, the reaction to a necessary adjustment is not difficult to imagine. The United States is further from its crisis point than Greece was in 2009, but the trajectory is documented by the government itself. The Social Security trustees issue an annual report. For decades, it has contained the same warning. The trust fund will be depleted around 2033, after which the system can only pay approximately 77% of scheduled benefits. The warning is official, it is public, it is updated annually, and it is ignored because addressing it would require exactly the kind of adjustment that French protesters refused to accept. Consider what this means in personal terms. If you are 45 years old today, you will reach full Social Security retirement age around 2044. On current trustees' projections, the trust fund will have been depleted for over a decade by that point. The system will be paying benefits from incoming contributions only, which, at the projected worker-to-retiree ratio, means approximately 77 cents for every dollar currently scheduled. If you are 35 today, you reach retirement age around 2054. The trustees' projections for that period show a system under even more severe strain, with no mechanism for closing the gap without either significant tax increases or significant benefit reductions, or both. This is not a prediction of collapse. The system will not disappear. Governments do not allow that. What they allow instead is a quiet, gradual reduction in real value, through benefit cuts, through inflation, through means testing, through raising the age at which full benefits begin. Each adjustment is framed as a technical correction. Together, they accumulate into something that looks very different from what was promised. The Congressional Budget Office projects that under current law, meaning without legislative changes to benefits, taxes, or eligibility, spending on Social Security and Medicare combined will exceed all federal tax revenue by 2050. Under that scenario, everything else, defense, infrastructure, education, research, would require deficit financing. This is a projection, not a prediction. It assumes no reform occurs, but it is the government's own modeling of its own trajectory. This is not a crisis. It is a constraint. It narrows every year. Some argue that immigration solves the demographic problem. It partially does, in the short term, but the scale required is staggering. To maintain Italy's current ratio, economists estimate over 2 million working-age immigrants annually would be needed. And there is a compounding problem. Immigrants age. They eventually retire into the same system they helped fund. Unless immigration is permanently and continuously increasing, it delays the mathematics without resolving them. Others argue productivity growth closes the gap. Historically, advanced economies average 1 to 2% annual productivity growth. Offsetting the demographic shift requires 3 to 4%, rates not seen since the unique post-war conditions of the 1950s, driven by rebuilding from destruction and a baby boom that is not repeating. No developed economy is achieving this. You receive what was promised. It buys less. No announcement, no default, no moment you can point to and say, there, that is when they took it. Eleanor stood in line at 4 a.m. because Greece, locked into the euro, could not choose the third option. It had to cut directly. That is why Greece went visibly and suddenly. Countries with their own currencies go quietly and slowly, through the mechanism documented in this channel as second and third videos. The deeper pattern is identical across every case. Safety nets are built during eras of growth, with demographic assumptions that made sense at the time. When those assumptions fail, the net becomes a fiscal anchor, too dependent upon to dismantle, too expensive to fully fund, too politically toxic to genuinely reform. So you extend, delay, borrow, print, and hope. Eleanor believed what most people believe, that her contributions were saved, that her pension was a contract, that the numbers she had been shown were the only numbers that mattered. She was a mathematics teacher. She understood numbers. The numbers she was shown were accurate. What she was never shown was the demographic assumption underneath them, the one that every actuary knew was failing, that every trustee's report documented, and that no politician had any incentive to address. She stood in line at 4 a.m, not because she was naive or careless or uninformed. She stood there because the information that would have changed her preparation was available, in actuarial tables, in annual reports, in budget projections, and was never translated into language that reached her before it was too late. That translation is what this channel exists to do, not to produce panic, not to assign blame, to make the pattern visible before it becomes personal. Outrage is understandable, it is also not useful. The pattern does not change because someone is angry about it. What changes is individual positioning. And positioning requires understanding the architecture first. That is where this starts, not to predict the date of a crisis, not to recommend a specific response, but to make the pattern visible. The same pattern documented in every actuarial table, every trustee's report, every IMF warning, every OBR projection across every developed economy on Earth. And most people will not see it until they are standing in a line at 4 a.m, hoping the machine still works. This channel examines the architecture of financial systems, the structural patterns that operate beneath the surface of events. Most people experience only after they become personal. The pension system documented in this video connects to patterns this channel has examined separately. Inflation erodes the real value of fixed benefits. Financial repression transfers wealth from savers to debtors. A previous video on this channel documented 5 categories of assets that have historically maintained value outside institutional reach. The connection between that analysis and this one is not accidental. What a rational person does with this information depends entirely on their circumstances, their age, their country, their obligations, their existing position. This channel does not make that calculation for individuals, but understanding which promises are structural and which are political is the first step in deciding where to place weight. There is a pattern this channel has not yet examined, one that ties everything together at the structural level. That is the next video. If this forensic lens is useful, if understanding how systems actually behave before their consequences become undeniable is the analysis you want, subscribe. It costs nothing. It tells the algorithm that serious, evidence-based analysis deserves a wider audience. Share this with one person who would engage with it seriously, not for views. Because Eleanor's situation becomes more comprehensible and more avoidable, the more people understand what is underneath the promise. And leave a comment with this. You now know that your government pension is a policy and not a legal contract. Knowing that, just that one fact, does it change anything about how you're thinking about your own retirement? I read every comment. The range of answers will shape what this channel examines in the 6th video. The information was always public. Eleanor knew the numbers. She just didn't know which numbers to look at. Now you do.